you so much for joining us for this incredibly important conversation with Ayaan Hirsi Ali regarding freedom of speech on college campuses. My name is Hannah Noor, and today I will be your host. First, I'd like to start off by introducing myself. I am a senior at the University of Central Florida, double majoring in biomedical sciences and sociology. I'm also part of the Critical Thinking Fellowship at the Ayaan Hirsi Ali Foundation. As a fellow, I am able to host events to start a conversation in advancing freedom and human rights, both in the United States and around the world. The Critical Thinking Fellowship aims to strengthen the liberties for students by nurturing this critical thinking on U.S. college campuses. This program is part of the Ayaan Hirsi Ali Foundation, which is a nonprofit that works to protect women from forced marriage, genital mutilation, and honor violence, with an overall emphasis on liberty for all. The AHA Foundation also works to ensure that free speech is upheld in the face of opposition, censorship, and intimidation. This now brings us to today's topic. Partisan and ideological divisions are causing ruptures in North America's social fabric. We see freedom stifled on college campuses and students unwilling to engage in difficult or controversial discussions. Political correctness and political bias have closed minds to engaging with differing points of view in the spirit of open-minded inquiry. In today's conversation, we will explore the importance of free speech on college campuses and examine the dangers of silencing ideas in higher education. Our special guest today is Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Our speaker's story began in Somalia in 1969, where as a young girl, she was subjected to female genital mutilation. Upon being forced by her father to marry a distant cousin, she fled to Holland, where she worked her way up from humble beginnings to eventually serving as a member of the Dutch Parliament. Her unique experiences allowed her to speak on a number of issues related to fundamentalist Islam and the treatment of women. This activism eventually led to death threats against her following the murder of Theo van Gogh. Of all people, Ayaan understands the necessity of speaking truth to power and bringing forth nuance in the face of narratives. She is a woman that does not back down when she sees a problem, and as a public intellectual with a powerful voice, she's a well-known defender of freedom of speech, both in the United States, supporting First Amendment rights, and abroad, advocating for freer dialogue in closed societies. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Thank you very, very much for that wonderful and generous introduction. I'm going to jump in and say, I'm going to start by sharing my free speech story of the day with you, and then invite you, all of you who are listening in, who have joined, when you put a question forth or a comment, share with me on this platform, in this webinar, a moment when either you've been canceled or you think you couldn't express what you wanted to express because you fear that something unpleasant will happen to you or your loved ones, your friends, your fellow students, etc. My anecdote of the day is actually today. I was supposed to be on a webinar about less than 2 hours away before now with the University of Cornell. It was just going to be like this. I did 2 yesterday. I was going to do two today. And then I got a message. I suppose, Alex, if you could share that with everyone, you could read the exact details of that. But the woman, young student who was supposed to host this said, I had no clue what Ayaan Hirsi Ali represented. I don't know what the foundation does. I've just found out. And I want to cancel this webinar, and I don't want to be a part of what Ayaan Hirsi Ali does because of her intolerance towards Muslims. I'm paraphrasing all of this. But it struck me when this message was sent that it's a day before the event is supposed to take place. We live in the age of Google. And so it's quite interesting that the student had no clue of what she was getting herself into by joining the AHA Foundation or by associating herself with me. So I want to give you all a warning. If you don't want to associate yourselves with me or the AHA Foundation, use the chat function or the raise hand function and just say straight away, I don't want to have anything to do with this, and you're free to go. If you don't agree with anything I say or might potentially say, and you just want to stay and listen because it's interesting, stay. You might never know what you hear. You're free to come, you're free to go. And I think ultimately, the freedom of speech boils down to having the right and the privilege to offend. Freedom of speech is not about politeness. I think every culture, every civilization, every household, even every single criminal syndicate knows within those microcosms of communities what you can and can't say, what you will get away with and what you want. If it's about being polite or impolite, being impolite, knowing that you are being impolite, is not about freedom of speech. If you have an employer, a boss you don't like, maybe you work for a corporation you don't like, you are at a university and you don't like half what's going on there, and you just hate it. Expressing your views may not have anything to do with the freedom of speech. So being disgruntled on a personal level is not an expression of free speech. One of the qualities of free speech, and I think it's probably the most important one of all that, is it's a form of public service. If you are a citizen of China and you know what's going on with the Uyghur community, and you start talking to your parents, your family, your extended family, your community, maybe you even stand up to the government, you're exercising your freedom of speech. You know that you're offending. You know that you're offending the powers to be. You know that the consequences are dire, but you know that staying silent is even more dire than that. So in my life experience, when 9/11/2001 happened, I had a choice. I could be like everyone else and say, gasp, what have these young men done? It has nothing to do with my religion. It has nothing to do with me. They're just 19 itemized young men, and I have no clue what they're on about, but they don't represent us. In that case, I would choose not to exercise my freedom of speech, freedom of conscience. But if I thought, well, actually, what these 19 men did completely reflects what I believe in, what I was taught to believe in, and I'm feeling very uneasy about that. And I would contribute, it's a public service. It's like joining the military to say, this problem is within my community, my religious community, my tribal community, my national community. And if I share that, maybe we can expose it address it and change things, I think you are exercising your freedom of speech. For young students joining today, I want to point to 3 things that I see. Maybe you see more things. First of all, there's the Communist Party of China. And we've just talked about how it's the biggest deal in your generation. My generation has known its genocides. The baby boomers have known their genocides, and beyond that in history. And people within those generations, a very few number, have always stood up to the powers of that moment who were engaged in committing that genocide. Today, it's the Communist Party of China. They are committing a genocide against the Uyghur people, and there are very few people speaking up. If you speak up and speak out against that, you are exercising your right and your privilege to free speech, and you might bring about change. A second one, which is a lot less painful and troubling, is the CDC. And this whole turn that the affair of COVID is taking on. I believe in vaccines. I've been vaccinated 3 times. So 1, 2, and boosted. I have had Omicron. I'm feeling very, very uneasy about many of the restrictions that we had to adopt when the disease was new. And there was this, well, at some point, we're going to overcome the disease. It may develop from being a pandemic to endemic, lose the mask, lose some of these freedoms that we gave up and we gave to the government. We'll get our freedoms back. But now I think we're at a moment where I'm thinking, scratch my head, what the heck is going on? Students, young people, they're the ones whose freedoms are compromised the most. If you want to challenge that, you will need to tap onto your freedom of speech, your freedom. I'm not saying that you have to agree with or disagree with whatever the government is saying, but it is a time to ask very healthy questions to say, when is this thing going to end? And what are the terms? What are the narrow interests here? What is going on? I say this as a woman who used to wear the burqa. I used to cover my face. So I didn't need to be persuaded to cover my face because of a pandemic, a virus. I used to cover my face because I thought that's what God wanted me to do. I hated it back then because God demanded that I do it. I hated it now because the virus demands that I do it. And so I'm the kind of person, not to be pesky, but to say, when is this going to end? I also hate to see toddlers, 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds being asked to cover their faces from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. And I just want to know, if you were if you had conversations like this, how many of you would be in an environment where you would just be shut down and told, well, things are just the way they are? And that answer is, of course, never satisfying. I would say the next thing is about crime and ideology. And I have witnessed it firsthand. People who put forth ideas about how to treat and how to relate to people who are breaking the laws that everybody has to follow. You show them empathy, you show them compassion. But what if that doesn't help? What do we do with the mentally ill? What do we do with people who can't, for whatever reason, they're just not capable of having their own homes? These are the questions of the day that may require for us to ask questions that make the establishment feel uncomfortable. Exercise our freedom of speech. our freedom of conscience. And for those who are religious, our freedom of religion. Now, I want to invite you, each of you, before you ask a question, or share a moment when you think your freedom of speech or your freedom of conscience has been compromised, even if it's in a small way. And what are the concessions that you made? And going forward, what are the concessions you think you will not make? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ayaan. So going forward, I'd like to explain the rest of this webinar. We will have different panelists coming on, and we're just going to go ahead and jump right on that. So our first panelist is Daniel James Sharp. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
So Daniel is a 2021 graduate of the University of Edinburgh in English Literature and History. He's also a senior columnist on Arrow magazine.
Thanks, Hannah, for organising this event, and thanks, Ayaan, for being here. I'm really glad that you mentioned the situation in China with the Uyghur community. I think it's really important to consider that, because so many Western leftists, of which I would still consider myself one, I have to say, kind of dismiss that whole topic, and they will go on about Islamophobia. But when it comes to criticizing China's treatment of a mostly Muslim group in China, they're conspicuously silent. So for me, it's the same fight, defending the rights of the women of Afghanistan or Iran, as well as the Uyghurs of China, is the same fight against totalitarianism and for universal human rights. So I just wanted to say I'm really glad that you mentioned that. As for me, I've not personally really had an experience of cancellation. I do know people who have had experiences of cancellation. One of my University of Edinburgh fellow students has an article wiped from an online publication because he quoted Martin Luther King, and after George Floyd, he, as a white person, was not allowed to quote Martin Luther King, apparently. So they deleted his article. I also have been involved with a recent case here in Scotland with Dr. Neil Finn, who's an academic at the University of Edinburgh, who was subjected to a campaign of vilification and harassment for essentially no reason whatsoever, by a group of students based on ideological reasons. But personally, thankfully, or maybe it means I'm not making enough of a noise, maybe I should be louder, but I've not been personally cancelled myself. But as you probably know, there is a hate crime bill here in Scotland which came into effect last year that is really very draconian in its content. It's coming up for about a year now since it was passed. So even if I haven't been personally targeted yet, there is this really quite authoritarian law that is now affecting my country. And I think I'm quite jealous of America, because despite all of your problems, you still have the glorious protection of the First Amendment, which I wish we had here. So you should be grateful for that, at least, despite everything that's going on. To come to my question, sorry, I don't mean to go on, but to come to my question, I was reading a little bit of Infidel earlier, your wonderful memoir, and you describe the intellectual exhilaration you experienced at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands when you studied there, discovering new ideas and new people and this whole new world that opened up in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, personally, what do you think is the difference between when you studied when you were a university student and what you see now on campus, do you think it's that we've lost something in the past few decades? Do you think that the intellectual atmosphere has become more constricted? I would just be interested to know your sort of comparison between what your experience was as a student and compared to today.
So Daniel, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that. I think I've also been following what's going on around in Scotland and other parts of the UK, with especially the development of the hate crime legislation, not limited to the UK. I've seen in countries even like Denmark and Sweden toying with these, some of them passing these laws. And I would say this is a huge curb on freedom of speech. Yes, thank God, thank the heavens, thank the founding fathers in the United States of America that we have the First Amendment. And so it's going to be in the Western world very, very difficult for them to dim the light of free speech in America because of the First Amendment. To answer your question, in the 1990s, I went to the University of Leiden in 1995. That's smack in the middle of the mid-90s. My professors were either old enough and were educated in, immersed in the events that had taken place during the First World War and the Second World War. And the parents of those professors, their relatives, people they knew, people in their communities had served in the First World War or in the Second World War. Holland is a very, very small place. Everybody knows everyone else. So the professors who were teaching me and my fellow students, they knew someone or someone's family member who either had joined the resistance against Hitler and his expansion into most parts of Europe, or they knew someone whom they considered a traitor who had sold out. So for these professors, the older ones, the lack of freedom was tangible. They understood what totalitarianism was all about. And then for the younger ones, they had lived through and had become adults during the Soviet-US standoff. And what was going on behind the Iron Curtain was sold off to many Europeans, and many European intellectuals had bought into thinking that Russia, Stalinism, and beyond, that they were engaged in some kind of project to bring about full egalitarianism. And many of them had endeavored, they had gone in as journalists, as researchers into the USSR, and they had seen with their own eyes what the gulags looked like. They had spoken to thousands of people who were trying to get away from that side of the Iron Curtain and come into the West. And they understood the cultural implications, not just the material implications, like, oh yeah, people are on the other side of the Iron Curtain, they didn't have enough of everything. No, it was also here. They weren't allowed to think, they weren't allowed to express themselves, they weren't allowed to exchange their ideas. They had no freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. My professors understood that, they lived it. So I think I was lucky enough to have come from Africa where that sort of stuff was taking place. And then I'm in the Netherlands, I'm exposed to these professors and they're giving us a type of material to show us, God, this is what things looked like when Hitler had enticed or bewildered the majority of the German population or subjected them into believing that what he was doing was something that they thought was not only acceptable, but something that they could strive for. So I was lucky enough to be steeped in that because of my teachers, because of my professors. So the experience that you guys are having in college is vital. It's in college, in these years. You've left high school, you're now embarking on adulthood. After college, you're going to get jobs, you're going to have children, you're going to marry, you're going to found businesses, you're going to, all of that. And I found myself at just the perfect spot where I was exposed to these great minds and the other great minds that they exposed me to. And then fast forward, I'm at the University of Stanford right now, a few years ago at the University of Harvard and several other universities. And my fear, Daniel, is that I'm seeing young people who are too far removed from these dramatic historical moments. First World War, Second World War, the Soviet Union, the standoff during the Cold War between the US and the USSR. China is emerging, and they just can't place these things. They haven't been taught enough. They haven't been exposed enough. And even though they're brilliant and they're privileged, they can easily be taken advantage of. That's what I'm seeing. And that's quite unfortunate. And I think, I think that's I want to answer your question as honestly as I can, but I'm telling you that that's a big deal.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think the important thing is to kind of learn history, basically. I think I had quite a fortunate university experience, but people really need to study history. So thank you very much for that enlightening answer.
All right, thank you so much, Daniel, for asking that question. Next up, we are going to have Ayaan Mirza, who is an undergraduate student at Alma College and is studying philosophy.
Thank you, Hannah. I think I'll have to cancel you. It's Ayaan Misra. No, you're good. Thank you so much for hosting this. Seta, hey, Ayaan. I hope
Hi,
you're well. Your name really messes up the Google search for my name because it's just you, because our names are remarkably similar. So I've been a long time follower of yours. And your writings were mostly theory for me until I spent a month in Djibouti last summer hitchhiking, which is a country that borders your home country, Somalia. And that's when what you write about became practical for me, because I didn't see any women on the street. There were just no women, barely any that I saw. And the ones that I saw were, I just understood your contribution to feminism. And I really appreciate that, especially seeing that in the Islamic world. When I came back to America after that 3-month hiatus in Africa, I remember I was in tears when I was in LAX because I genuinely loved this country. And my love for this country prodded me to, because you asked, have you experienced cancellation?
Yes.
You can read more about it in an Atlantic article coming this week, or the NY Post article that's already out there. But I think in my sophomore year, which is in 2020, I had 4 campus jobs for which there was a diversity, equity, and indoctrination or whatever, inclusion. Yeah, I tend to call it indoctrination now. Yeah, so I just get confused. And there was a 4-hour session for that, and prior to which we got a 15-page document of words we can say and cannot say. And I was a biology tutor and I was a biology TA among 2 of my 4 or 5 jobs. And one of the few things I couldn't say was opposite sexes. And I didn't know how to teach biology without talking about the sexes, if you talk about reproduction. That was the first sign of what the hell is happening on my campus. And then the other was just the training session where I was told that if a professor compliments your English, an international student's English, that's racist. And I was sitting back wondering, my first day in this college campus, my most liberal, my most favorite philosophy professor complimented my English. And as an international student, that was such a confidence boost for me. Are you telling me that man's racist? And so I realized the problem with this system, and I ended up writing a campus-wide memo against these trainings. And I was, using science to tell them these things are actually detrimental for students. For that email, I was called a xenophobe, a racist. I mean, when white people call me a xenophobe, it's the funniest thing. But yeah, I was all of that, right? And so it was a pseudo cancellation of sorts. So that's my experience among many others, but not to take much time. My question has to do with diversity on campuses. I personally disagree with Harvard belittling Asian students in the name of racially diversifying the campus. However, and I've been thinking about this a lot, a fundamentalist approach to this is not nuanced. Harvard does raise a good point, right? That if admissions are sheerly merit-based, Harvard would end up looking a lot like certain neighborhoods of San Francisco with an inordinate number of Asian students. Is there a middle ground, or is this a non-problem requiring no solution? Is it okay if the Harvard student body becomes 90% Asian, which is an inaccurate representation of America, or should it be completely merit-based?
Amazing question. And I think this is the question America is going to have to struggle with in the coming years. And I will get to your two comments later, but I want to answer your question first because I think it's really, really important. And here's how I answer it. What is it that Asian families are doing to their children that make their children want to achieve? There are a number of key points that African Americans and other Africans and other Blacks who are successful, when we sit around the table and say, how can we lift our communities up? What is it that we can do? There are a couple of things that we all talk about. We talk about the nuclear family. Don't have children until you're ready to actually have them. Have children with an individual that you want to have children with. Have the resources to raise those children in a competitive world, and then be there for them, okay? Now, it looks to me and to most of us as if Asian families are doing just that. They're investing large amounts of time and resources in looking after their children, protecting their children, and setting them up to succeed. If African Americans did that, if all the communities where you have single parenthood, absent fathers, neglected children, children that are born into families where there are all sorts of like addictions, etc. If all of that is corrected for, you're not going to compromise on merit. You're not going to tell Asian families, quit looking after your children, lower your standards. You're going to tell the communities that don't spend enough time looking after their kids and say, why don't you invest in that? And for those kids who don't have the opportunity to be, their parents are dead or divorced or are completely useless, they may be in prison, etc., you could say, we can take the resources we have and create substitute environments where we can, as a society, try to give these kids as much as we can that should have been given to them by their parents. But now society has to give it to them. That would be my approach. Is that too difficult? It has been made too difficult because it's been muddied. It's been polluted with, skin color. It's just the Asians or the whites who are the achievers, and because they're the achievers, they're the oppressors. I think a lot of Black people and a lot of underprivileged communities of all colors, they see right through this and they don't like it. The answer does not lie in lowering standards. The answer lies in raising standards for everyone. In terms of Asian families and a bunch of things that they need to deal with, maybe the tiger mom syndrome. I guess we need to talk about that, but that's a different conversation. But in terms of just, your question specifically was about merit. If Harvard is going to look all Asian, I'm fine with it. And so is every African American who actually understands the value of merit. And then it is, how do you, as a Black person, Black family, how do you get to do what those Asian families are doing for their children? And then on your comments about gender and being complimented on your English, I share with you, even to this day, I've been in the English speaking world for quite a long time, and I love to get compliments on my vocabulary, on my sentences, on, have you read this book? I love it. Of course, it's an achievement. It's hard work. So compliments to you for that. On the gender thing, I don't know. I'm looking at our president, George, and I'm saying maybe I should withhold comment on this. My personal, maybe it's a question of freedom of speech. I'll say it the way J.K. Rowling says it. I think that I'm totally comfortable with everybody being whatever they choose to be and having a right to dignity. So if you are transgender, you have every right to live life proud and with dignity like all of us. But if the transgender activists, and especially the far left activists, use that to compromise the rights of women, then I'm going to come out fighting. And if they want to call me a TERF, then I will say I'm very proud to be a TERF. I have stood up and will stand up to people and groups and communities and all age religions that are way more intimidating than a handful of radical transgender activists for what I believe in for the rights of women. I'll stand up to them.
All right, awesome.
Thank you so much, Ayaan.
Thank you, Ayaan, for that question. Thank you, Aryan, for thank you, Aryan, for that question, and Ayaan for that answer. Looks like we have time for one more question. So our next panelist will be Casey Speed. Casey Speed is an undergraduate student at the University of Central Florida studying neuroscience, criminology, and history. The floor is yours, Casey.
All right. I'll try to keep this short and sweet. Thank you very much, Hannah, for hosting this, and thank you, Ayaan, for speaking to us. So in society today, we're encouraged to be hyper aware of any potential microaggressions towards peers and fellow students that could potentially cause offense. We're taught to second guess our opinions and determine if they match the correct ideas that we see on campus or the correct ideas that everyone else seems to hold. I've been told as a mixed race that my ideas and my opinions don't specifically match what I look like. And at that point, I'm left considering if by voicing my opinions, I'm doing myself more damage than good. In that notion, I know many students have chosen silence over a backlash that could threaten our academic careers going forward. How do you think this modern era of victimology has pushed academia towards tolerance over fact?
Do you have a specific situation where you actually felt that you either had to compromise your freedom of conscience or freedom of speech?
Certainly. In political situations, when I'm trying to discuss politics, with example, for friends, I'll sometimes hold back nothing that's, I think, is overly done, but things that I know could go into territory where I start getting told that by supporting someone or by not supporting someone, I'm doing injustice to my Asian heritage. I've had that occur every now and then, and it's a conversation I'd rather not get into with people.
So in answer to your question, I will say, if you look at the, honoring individual rights versus collective rights. So are you a collectivist or are you an individualist? Obviously, the answer is somewhere in the middle, because you can't always be an individualist. We live in social settings. You have to be polite and you have to take part in social activities. But when I'm told, or when I feel that people are being told to behave in certain ways, you are an Asian, you are a Mexican, so you can be this. I'd say the hair on the back of my neck go up. And I respond to that by thinking, who the heck are you to tell me what I can and can't do, what I should and shouldn't do? So just like with Ayaan Hirsi, just the way we relate, he's been to Djibouti, he has seen things just by reading my books. I believe I've read the books of people who come from a world, couldn't be farther away from the world that I was born in and grew up. And I think it is this cross-pollination of ideas, of relationships that makes human beings rich. So someone telling you you can't behave like that because of your immutable biological traits, they're full of BS. And you know they're full of BS. And that they are out to control. They want power. They want power over your mind. They want to engage in mind F, and you don't let them. And you shouldn't let them. And I think students today actually should engage in getting together, organizing, and empowering themselves against this stuff, against mind F, against Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi, people who come out and just declare you are racist because you happen to have a white skin, or you are a victim because you happen to have a black skin. Even if you're in an Ivy League college and you're born to very wealthy parents from Nigeria, you're still supposed to view yourself as a victim. It's just nonsense. And I think we need to fight that. And maybe for the students, kids who are now 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, you guys need to hang out together from all different races, genders, sexual orientations, and revolt against this identity politics, revolt against the woke. Tell them to go to the Amazon, leave you alone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ayaan, and thank you for the panelists. This now concludes the conversation, but this has certainly opened the door for future discussions on this extremely important topic. Now, this recording will be available in the coming weeks. So thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me.